So far we've talked about rolling perms, we've practiced our sectioning and rolling perms, and we've talked about the chemical reactions that will take place when we process our perms. So now we want to talk about the actual structure of the hair and other things that concerns us about permanent waving. And we've had a little brief discussion about the structure of the hair and how it's made, but we're going to go into a little more detail now. And in our brief discussion we said the internal part, or the pith of the hair, is the medulla. It's surrounded by the cortex, and then it is protected by the cuticle layer. So let's first discuss our cuticle layer. It's a tough outer layer of the hair, surrounds the inner layers, and its purpose is to protect the hair. It has no coloring matter in it, doesn't have any of the bonds. It's simply a protection, kind of like our skin is on our body, to protect the internal parts. A strong compact cuticle layer makes for resistant hair, meaning the hair resists penetration and is difficult to service. But to look on the other side of that resistance, let's assume the hair had no resistance to our chemical services. In permanent waving that wouldn't be too detrimental, because we could squirt the lotion on there really quickly and then be ready to get it off quickly. But when we go into chemical hair relaxing or hair coloring, we got to start back here and we got to apply it strand per strand, and sometimes that'll take 10-15 minutes. And if our hair had no resistance, what would happen to that first hair that we put that solution on, the relaxer or the hair color? It would eat it up. It would blow the hair up. If there was no resistance, blow it up and deteriorate it. Although the cuticle is not directly involved in chemical texture services, the chemicals must be able to penetrate through the cuticle in order to be effective. And that also tells us a little bit about how we choose what strength permanent waving solution or chemical relaxer that we put on there. If the cuticle is closed down real tight like this, what permanent wave solution are we going to choose? What strength if we've got a cuticle scale that's closed down that tight? Mild, normal, or super? This strong. We're going to need it to open those cuticle scales up, because if we cannot open them, penetrate into the cortex, we're not going to get any chemical change that we're looking for in the hair. Chemical hair texturizers offer you the ability to change the hair's natural curl pattern. These alkaline solutions soften and swell the hair, raising the cuticles, and thereby permitting the solution to penetrate through the cuticle to its target, which is the cortex. Coarse-resistant hair with a strong compact cuticle layer requires a texturizer which is highly alkaline. A less alkaline or lower pH solution is used for more porous, damaged, or chemically treated hair. So one of the main things we want to talk about here is the cortex, because that's where we actually change curly hair to straight or straight hair to curly. The cortex is the middle layer of the hair, located directly beneath the cuticle. The polypeptide chains of the cortex are connected by end bonds and cross-linked by side bonds that form the fibers and structure of hair. These chemical bonds hold the hair in its natural wave pattern and are responsible for the incredible strength and elasticity of human hair. Breaking the side bonds of the cortex makes it possible to change the natural wave pattern of the hair. So I want to talk to you about something we've already been over, and that's about our amino acids and hair being fiber or protein, fiber proteins. Do you remember when we talked briefly about going through the zone of keratinization, how hair first starts out? We eat proteins, and they're broken up by our digestive juices, and eventually they go into our bloodstream. Our bloodstream then leaks blood into the bottom of the hair bulb through our capillaries, and when it gets in our hair bulb, the amino acids begin to join back together. And certainly they don't look like the steak that we ate, but they're still amino acids, and they joined end on end by what they call peptide bonds. We have so many peptide bonds in the hair that they're called polypeptide chains. And if you'll think back to when I told you how these fibers was put together, it was like taking a lot of threads and wrapping them into a bundle and another into a bundle, and then taking those bundles and twisting like ropes. The length of that is related to the peptide bonds. We never want to break peptide bonds. The only time we would willingly break those is if we cut hair off. You know, it's broken then. However, in permanent waving and chemical relaxing, we're going to use chemicals that are strong enough to break those peptide bonds. That occurs when we choose a permanent wave that is too strong for the type of hair we've got, or we leave a chemical on the hair for too long. So the chemical bonds that join the amino acids are called peptide bonds, or N bonds. These are the only N bonds in the hair. These peptide bonds link together to form long chains of amino acids called polypeptide chains. Proteins are long, coiled, complex polypeptide chains made of many different amino acids that are linked together end to end like pop beads. Y'all remember pop beads? It's got little beads, and on one end it's got a hole in it, and then it's got a little notch on the other, so they fit inside of each other. You can make your necklace as long as you want to, and they'll pop right apart, so you can put different colors in with it. And that's kind of how our peptide bonds are. We should not break these peptide bonds, and if we do, we have no way of reforming them back. That's the scary part. If we leave that chemical on there too long, or we put on a chemical that is too strong for that type of hair, those bonds are broken forever. Unlike the side bonds that we're about to discuss, we can break the side bonds and reform them back. As a matter of fact, if we'll think about the hydrogen bonds, we talked about physical changes. You know, I tell you, you take your client back there and you wet their hair. That breaks their hydrogen bonds. Those hydrogen bonds are so wimpy that if you walk outside when there's been a shower, or it's real foggy, there's a lot of dampness in the air, that'll break the hydrogen bonds. You don't even really have to wet the hair, just the dampness in the air will break them. So the hydrogen bonds are relatively weak physical side bonds that are the result of an attraction between opposite electrical charges. Hydrogen bonds are easily broken by water, and that's how we make our physical changes. She comes in and her hair's straight and she wants it curly, but she doesn't want to go to a chemical change, so we roll it on rollers or on blow it dry and put it on the curling iron or whatever. Dampness breaks those hydrogen bonds. Heat reforms those hydrogen bonds, or drying the hair reforms them. So that is a side bond. That is a physical side bond. The main thing we want to work with in permanent waving is to break some bonds and let them slip back into a new position, which is now rolled on our wave rods. And that is the disulfide bonds. Disulfide bonds are formed between two cysteine amino acids located on neighboring polypeptide chains. A disulfide bond joins a cysteine sulfur atom on one polypeptide chain with a second cysteine sulfur atom on the neighboring polypeptide chain to form cysteine, which is simply the oxidized form of cysteine. And where they're forming is where these fibers are wrapped so tightly together that they're actually on each other. So, and what happens when we put our permanent waving solution on them, they're like this, and it allows them to break apart and go into a new curl position. Disulfide bonds are weaker than our peptide bonds, but are much stronger than either hydrogen or salt bonds. And remember now, our hydrogen bonds are physical, so it can be broken by physical means. Our disulfide bonds are chemical bonds, so they have to be broken by chemicals. Disulfide bonds, as a matter of fact, are strong chemical side bonds that are not broken by heat or water. Although there are far fewer disulfide bonds than hydrogen or salt bonds, disulfide bonds are the stronger of the three side bonds and account for about 1/3 of the hair's overall strength. The chemical and physical changes in disulfide bonds make permanent waving, soft curl permanence, and chemical hair relaxing possible. So what role does our side bonds that are called salt bonds play? They're also physical bonds, and any change in pH breaks the salt bonds. We remember what the pH of hair, skin, and nails is? Yes, that's the average pH of it. Some books say it's 4.5 to 5.5, and some books say it's 4.5 to 6.5 will keep hair, skin, and nails in their normal range. So salt bonds are relatively weak physical side bonds that are the result of an attraction between opposite electrical charges. Salt bonds are easily broken by changes in pH, as in permanent waving, but they reform when the pH returns to normal. Even though salt bonds are far weaker than disulfide bonds, the hair has so many salt bonds that they also account for about 1/3 of the hair's total strength. One of the first things we want to do when we start to do our live clients, and we have someone booked with us for a permanent wave, is to do a consultation. What is the importance of our consultation with this client? To know what we can use on their hair. To know what they like. What else? How much you can. It's a fact-finding mission for us. The first thing we really want to find out is what do they want. And during the course of this consultation, we're going to find out, can they get what they want? Because sometimes people simply want what they cannot get. You know, we can't have a hairdo this big on somebody that only has 100 hairs on their head. And we can't put curl in somebody's hair that's already let their next door neighbor put 2 or 3 permanent waves in it, which may or may not have worked. May have worked too good to the point of overprocessing. So we're going to be finding out a lot of things about her in the consultation. Once we find out what she wants, we're going to have her fill out some records. What's those records going to tell us about her? The form she's going to fill out for us, what is she going to tell us on the form that she's going to fill out for us? Information about her. Some of the things we're more concerned with is she on medication? Has she had surgery recently? About the prior surfaces she's had on her hair. If you'll remember, we can't do a perm on somebody that had metallic dyes on their hair. So if we find out she's been coloring her hair at home, we want to find out what has she been coloring it with. So a lot of these things are going to be on the form that she fills out, so it can be a true fact-finding mission for us. We want to give her a chance to talk and tell us a little bit about herself so that we know when we do something we're doing the very best we can and trying to get exactly what she wants. We're going to let her look at pictures. We're going to discuss with her. Now once she puts this chemical on her hair, she's going to have to do different things to take care of it than she did before, isn't she? Probably going to have to change types of shampoos, conditioners, and all that. We want to discuss with her styling abilities, because maybe she's just been wearing her hair straight and all she has to do to that is shampoo it and let it dry or either blow it dry. But if we put some perm in it, it may call for a little more care. We also want to look at the condition, texture, porosity, and all that of the hair. When we get through with her, or even before we get through with her while our perm's processing, we want to begin to fill out her permanent wave record. And we've put a lot of notes on that and the next thing we're going to go into after we get through with the consultation, we want to do an analysis. We also want her to sign a client release form. What does a client release form do for us? Yes, it's explaining to her that using a chemical is going to chemically alter her hair, and sometime there may be damage from that. It's not removing responsibility of what happens from us, because if we're negligent, then we're responsible for it, because we are the trained professional in this situation. But it explains to her that sometime with chemicals, unforeseen things may occur. And as long as we follow the rules and do what we should have, if she has some type of problem, her hair has some type of problem, it does relieve us of liability for it. What would be a time when we could be called negligent during a permanent wave? What could we do that would make us not paying attention? Let it sit for too long. Well, not long enough, she probably wouldn't sue us for it because we could do that over. But if we just decided we'd run uptown for a few minutes while she's processing, that's negligent. We know better than that. All right. Your book gives you some analysis here of what to do, and I call mine the 6-point analysis. So I'm going to veer off from the book a little bit. And I always start my analysis with the scalp. What am I looking for when I analyze this client's scalp? And remembering that we're about to do a chemical service. Any sores? Diseases? Why do I have a problem if there's a sore in her head? Because I could take some protective cream and put over that sore. The chemicals. I'm not going to personally take the chance of putting a protective cream on that sore and perming anyway, because we can wait for that sore to heal up, can't we? That's why we don't even brush the scalp when we get the tangles out of her hair before a perm. We don't even want to take a chance of those brush bristles irritating the scalp. What may happen to her if we just ignore the sore places or the open places she has on her scalp and proceed with our permanent waving? It can get into her bloodstream. It's going to probably burn that sore place. But oftentimes, make it more irritated. Oftentimes, clients will want you to go on with it. But clients, again, are not the trained professional. And most of us have found out sometime there's things we want that we just can't have right at that minute. And I often get the response, well, if I don't do it, somebody else will do it. Well, let somebody else go ahead and do it. You know, if they want to take that responsibility. So the first thing I do is the scalp analysis. If there's a problem with the scalp, I haven't used my time in doing the hair analysis, have I? I can stop right there, and that's the end of that until whatever problem is taken care of. So the number one thing is go ahead and do the scalp. Then I want to do the hair analysis. Hair is the fastest growing appendage on the human body. Anything that affects our general health affects our hair. That literally means what we eat or what we do is our hair. That's just how simple it is. Diet, exercise, medications, and stress all affect our hair and its growth. The quality of any permanent wave is directly related to the quality of the hair. You cannot take bad hair and a good permanent wave and wind up with good results. It takes a good permanent wave and good hair to have really good results. All other things being equal, strong hair usually produces much stronger curls than weak hair. Hair analysis is an essential part of a successful chemical hair service. A complete analysis will help you determine how the hair will react to the service and will also help to avoid your problems. The condition, texture, and wave pattern of the hair must be considered when selecting the type of relaxer or perm, the type and size of the perm tool, and the wrapping method. The 5 most important factors to consider in hair analysis are texture, density, porosity, elasticity, and growth direction. So let's start out by talking about texture. What is hair texture? Because we're talking about texturizing it now, or chemical texture services. It's the way it feels. Break it down a little bit further for me.
The roughness of it, if it's too rough.
Does it feel small or larger? Isn't it, whether it's coarse, medium, or fine? Coarse hair has a tendency to feel rougher, but we don't want to confuse the feeling rough with the porosity, because porous hair feels very rough. because the cuticle's being raised. That's exactly right. So let's talk about coarse hair. Coarse hair has a bigger diameter. So what does that mean to processing? What does the diameter have to do with the processing of our chemicals? How long to leave it on there? Would coarse hair have a tendency to take longer than fine hair, or vice versa? To what? It's going to take coarse hair longer. There's more of it. Coarse hair usually requires more processing than medium or fine hair, and may also be more resistant to processing. It is usually more difficult for permanent waving solutions to penetrate coarse hair. Medium hair, luckily for us, is what we meet most of the times in the beauty salon. We call it normal hair. It is considered normal and does not pose any special problems or concerns. Of course, we know that texture is not the only thing taken into consideration now, so we've got other factors we're going to add to this analysis. Fine hair is little bitty hair, so it's more fragile. You know, if you got a bigger thread over here and a little tiny one over here, which one's going to break first? That little bitty one's going to usually break first. Same thing with hair. So fine hair is more fragile, easier to process, and more susceptible to damage from perm services. As a general rule, fine hair will process faster and more easily than medium or coarse hair. So now we have our scalp analysis, we have our hair texture. Next we have the density. What is the density of the hair? It's the amount you have, or how many hairs per square inch on the scalp. Individuals with the same hair texture can have different densities. Some individuals with fine hair texture, characterized by each hair having a small diameter, may have high density. It means they've got a lot of them little bitty hairs. Others with coarse hair texture, characterized by each hair having a large diameter, may have low density. So they've got very few of those bigger hair strands. So now we have our scalp analysis, our hair texture, our hair density. What is hair porosity? What does porosity mean? How much it can absorb, or its ability to absorb. And it says moisture. It doesn't say how much permanent waving solution can the hair absorb. It's how much moisture can the hair absorb. The degree of porosity is directly related to the condition of the cuticle layer. What correlation do we have here between the porosity and the cuticle layer? If the cuticle is standing up, then that hair is not going to have any problems absorbing the moisture, is it? Because there's nothing there to keep the moisture out. Hair porosity is defined as resistant, normal, and porous. Let's assume we've got overly porous hair. What type of perm are we going to choose for overly porous hair? An acid balance for sure. But there's several kinds of acid balance, because remember, what was the pH range of acid balance? 7.6 to 8.2? All right. 7.8 to 8.2. So which one of those acid balanced are we going to try to choose for this overly porous hair? The one that's less alkaline. That's right. We may also have to use some special conditioning agent or filler before we put perm on hair that is overly porous. Something to help ease those cuticle scales down. If not, our perm may process too quickly, hasn't it? When does overprocessing take place when we're perming hair? First 5 to 10 minutes. And don't you imagine this overly porous hair is one of those that gets it that first 5 minutes? So overly porous hair has a raised cuticle layer that easily absorbs solution. Chemical services performed on overly porous hair require a less alkaline solution than those performed on resistant hair. A lower pH minimizes swelling and helps prevent excessive damage to the hair. That was kind of a trick question I gave back to you a while ago, which one of those acid balance perms you would choose. We got to remember, acid balance perms, there's different types of acid balance perms. We have the acid balance perm that is for normal hair, and we have the acid balance perms for resistant hair, and we have acid balance perms that are for overly porous hair or damaged hair or tinted hair. So that's what I was trying to get at. So we'd go back and we'd want to make sure it was as low in pH as possible, 7.8. Resistant hair has a tight, compact cuticle layer that resists penetration. What would happen if we chose a real mild perm and put on somebody that had resistant hair? It would not take. That would probably be the cause of our underprocessing. So we need to, this is when our supers or our strong strengths come into play. Chemical services performed on resistant hair require a more alkaline solution. A high pH raises the cuticle and permits uniform saturation and processing. Resistant hair also requires a slow and thorough application of perm solution to ensure complete saturation. In other words, when we start to apply our solution on these wave rods of hair that is resistant, the first part of that solution may very well shed off of it. Because remember, that's that protective coating on our hairs, our cuticle scales. Then we have our hair with normal porosity, and this is what makes up most of our clients. It's neither resistant nor is it too porous. Texture services performed on this type of hair will usually process as expected. So now we have our scalp analysis, our hair texture, our hair density, our hair porosity. Next is elasticity. Do you remember the rule about how much hair will stretch, and this being normal, healthy hair that we're discussing? 50% when it's wet. How much when it's dry? 20. How important is hair elasticity in permanent waving? It is very, because hair that's elasticity has been stretched past its limits. And we think about when we break a rubber band, it falls off in the floor. When we abuse the elasticity of hair, it may not necessarily fall off then, but it lacks the strength to hold curl in it. So elasticity is vitally important in it. Hair elasticity is an indication of the strength of the side bonds that hold the individual fibers of the hair in place. More than any other single factor, the elasticity of the hair determines its ability to hold curl. Hair elasticity is usually classified as normal or low. Wet hair with normal elasticity can stretch 50% of its original length and then return to its original length without any damage. Hair with normal elasticity usually holds the curl from wet sets and permanent waves. Wet hair with low elasticity does not return to its original length when stretched. Hair with low elasticity may not be able to hold the curl from wet sets and permanent waves. What causes our hair to have poor elasticity? Good question, isn't it? Poor side bonds, unhealthy hair, is what you're saying? What about prior chemical services? Yes. When we get into chemical hair relaxer, you're going to get so tired of hearing me say this. Put the chemical relaxer on there, smooth the hair, and get your hands off of it. Because when people put in a relaxer, they want to just keep combing it and combing it and combing. What are we doing to it? We're stretching that elasticity beyond its ability to stretch anymore. How can we tell if hair has poor elasticity? There is one test that is non-fail. Wet it and pull it? That's not it. But wetting it was a good answer. All of you shampoo your hair so you know how your hair feels wet. You can feel the individual hair fibers and all that. Right? If you suspect that you are having some elasticity problems, and it usually occurs along the ends of all of us unless we get regular cuts, When you wet your hair to shampoo it, the hair that's elasticity has had it. It's going to feel like wet cotton instead of individual strands of hair. So start watching this when you start shampooing clients. It will feel like a mush instead of the hair that we're accustomed to feeling. That's why I said a lot of your judgments are made with these fingertips here rather than the eyes. The eyes sees the damage, but the eyes cannot see how much it would stretch or wouldn't stretch. But when you put that water on it, it will just mush up like wet cotton. Hair that's like that, if it's a lot of it on a head and somebody wanting you to do a permanent wave or a chemical relaxer on it, you don't want to go there. Because that elasticity is already gone, and when you stretch it out, what's going to happen? It's going to come right on out, and we can lay it on the counter then. So you want to be...
When you wash your hair just comes out, a lot of the hair comes out. Does that mean?
We have normal shedding and not being like animals. You know, animals shed their furs or hairs at a certain time. We shed all the time. And the amount of shedding we have, unless it just gets super excessive, throughout the years that I've been teaching and when I trained, has changed a lot. It used to be said that you could lose 150 hairs a day and that you weren't having any type of problem, that just going through the normal shedding process, and you probably wouldn't do it every day. Now it's got down to like 40 hairs a day is normal. But everybody has hair loss.
So you said the ends feel like cotton, not like cotton?
If it's just the ends of the hair that feels like wet cotton and you're about to do a perm and you know they're going to get a trim afterwards, you haven't got to worry. But if it feels like it way up the strand, you don't want to perm that hair. All right. The next thing we want to consider is the direction of hair growth. Do y'all remember me telling you when we was rolling perms that we never roll against the hair growth? Because when we do, we're going to get a band mark where our rubbers were on the band. We're going to either get a band mark there. That's the least of the evils. The other thing that can happen is it'll just pop it off right there where the band's at. So you want to roll with the hair growth. What causes our growth patterns is where, and this, if you'll notice on your mannequin, they don't have any growth pattern. Every hair on that head sticks right straight out. That's why it's so hard to part. Ours has a growth pattern. At some point up here, this hair starts growing down, meaning the follicle is sloped down. And this starts growing down over here. Some of us, that's on the side. Some of us, it's in the middle. Some of us, it's even at a diagonal. And you can certainly tell where growth patterns change if you wind up with a little cowlick somewhere. Because this goes this way and that goes that way. But hair will part at its natural growth pattern change. When this starts growing over here and this starts growing over here. It's very easy to find out where that's at. All you got to do is wet all the hair, or when you've just shampooed, comb it all straight back, put your hand right here and just push forward a little bit, and that hair will fall right into its natural part. So the individual growth direction of the hair causes hair streams, whirls, and cowlick that influence the finished hairstyle and must be considered when selecting the base direction and wrapping pattern for each permanent wave. All right, we've already been over our sectioning and wrapping and our chemistry, and now we have our hair analysis. We know about our end bonds and our side bonds and why some have to be broken. I want to go back to my disulfide bonds for just a moment. We talked about breaking them with our permanent waving solution, but I want to stress again the importance of reforming them with neutralizer. That's what that other chemical is for. We put it on there to reform the disulfide bonds. It's not the same disulfide bonds we had before. They're joined up with different people now because they're curly instead of straight, so they're not joined up with this one right across here. They've jumped the fence and got with another neighbor. But they have been reformed. And if we fail to reform them, what's our perm going to be like? It's not going to be good because we've left bonds broken. So the hair's not going to be very good either after a while, is it? Because now our disulfide or side bonds are just hanging out there. All right, do y'all have questions? Let me tell you something about chemical relaxing and lead into our next unit. In chemical relaxing, when we use sodium hydroxide and break those same disulfide bonds, we cannot even reform them through neutralization. You remember in permanent waving we used hydrogen to break the bonds or reduce them. You remember reduction? Then we used a neutralizer, which is oxidation, to reform them. It's a redox reaction. When we do a sodium hydroxide relaxer, we're going to use the sodium hydroxide, and it turns them into lanthanide bonds. And we don't reform them. We put something on there to neutralize and take the hair back to its normal pH and help close the cuticle scales down, but we cannot reform the disulfide bonds that were broken with sodium hydroxide. They go through a process called lanthanization, and then they're called lanthanide bonds. So we'll get into that our next lecture. Do we have questions over this? All right.
The hydrogen and the salt bonds, are they about the same thing?
They're weak bonds, and we're only concerned with them with physical changes. And usually when we do a shampoo and set, we don't worry about bonds because we're not going to do any great damage to the hair. We worry about bonds when we get into chemical services such as permanent waving or chemical relaxing, because we can really damage the hair with these services. So that's why we're more concerned with the disulfide bonds. We can't help but reform the salt bonds and hydrogen bonds, because if we wet the hair, if we don't do anything else to it but wet it, what's going to happen to it in a few hours? It's going to dry and the bonds are reformed again. So we're not concerned with that. But if we break the disulfide bonds and don't do something to reform them, we've run into some problems.
So is the only real difference in salt and hydrogen bonds that salt bonds like changing the pH balance is what and then water makes hydrogen.
But when we add water to the hair and break the hydrogen bonds, it's going to break the salt bonds too, because water is 7 and hair is average of 5. Any other questions? All right.